Ladies and gentlemen, we will proceed with the session in a few moments, so please take your seats. May we now proceed with the closed session under Agenda 2, Enhancing Complementarities between the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This session will be co-chaired by His Excellency Chutinthorn Goksakti, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Thailand, and Mr. Kaveh Zahedi, Deputy Executive Secretary of the UN ESCAP. May we now give the floor to the co-chairs.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Would you like to say good afternoon? That's okay. Okay, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. So as Thailand is the ASEAN Coordinator on Sustainable Development Cooperation, it is my pleasure to co-chair this meeting today with Mr. Kaveh Zahedi, Deputy Executive Secretary of ESCAP. We hope that we'll have a good afternoon here together, and we hope it will not be too not be too wooden, you know, like many video conferences can be. And half of that responsibility is with us, but I urge you to take the other half of the responsibility, and let's see if we can really do some brainstorming, as the title suggests. The agenda item, we're now at agenda item 2, enhancing complementarities between the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, review of progress and ways forward. It will be divided into 2 parts. I will moderate the easy part, and in part A, progress on implementing actions under the Complementarities Initiative, while Mr. Zahedi will moderate the discussion in part B, effective implementation of the Complementarities Roadmap 2020 to 25 in light of the COVID-19 challenges that we continue to face. In part A, we will review the progress in the implementation of the Complementarities Initiative with the presentations by ESCAP, the ASEAN Secretariat, and the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue, or ACSDSD, located in Thailand. COVID-19 has posed multidimensional challenges to all of us. I think we're beginning to adjust. In my own ministry, we're planning for travel. I don't know whether that excites some of you or not. And the conversation we're having today is, are you going for your jab today or not? Unfortunately for me, the answer is no, but some of my colleagues, my bosses, they're having their jabs, you know, so you will read in the news more traveling, you know, around to do the government's and the world's essential work. Let's listen out for those upcoming meetings on important issues. Despite the challenges of COVID-19, ASEAN member states, you know, remain committed to staying the course and continuing to implement the SDGs as best we can. I believe that COVID-19 is, I hesitate to say a mixed blessing, but there are some utilities of having to go through you know, a pandemic like COVID-19, because we get to learn important and expensive lessons that may inform our work, for which we are here, you know, to brainstorm. Pursuing efforts on sustainability and sustainable development will help alleviate the impacts from the pandemic and build a more resilient future. This is reflected in the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework that the ASEAN leaders have agreed upon last November. The Complementarities Initiative is also an important tool towards this end. Its effective implementation can also contribute to post-COVID-19 recovery and enhance resilience of the region for what may come in the future. Key regional mechanisms such as the ACSDSD, are the relevant ASEAN sectoral bodies, as well as UN ESCAP, can play a pivotal role in supporting these efforts. With this, may I first invite Mr. Sahedi, my colleague, to give his presentation on the overall progress of the Complementarities Initiative, including in the context of the new ASEAN-UN Plan of Action 2021-2025. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair, and good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I think it's the fullest I've seen this hall in over a year, and it really is a pleasure to have so many people around the table here, and of course on the screen. My purpose is just to quickly set the scene for our conversation, and for that we're going to begin with a look at the progress of the ASEAN countries in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including through the lens of the Complementarities Initiative's 5 priority areas. The annual Asia-Pacific SDG Progress Report that was launched a couple of weeks ago here in ESCAP provides us with the basis for our understanding of the developments towards the Sustainable Development Goal in our region, but also in its sub-regions. And the report assesses, more importantly, some of the gaps that need to be closed to achieve the 2030 agenda and to achieve the goals. If we look at the progress that is being made in the ASEAN region, the snapshot that you have on your screens is the current progress. And what you'll see here is, as in previous years, those of you who've joined us in previous years, that it's a mixed picture of progress. I'd like to just quickly illustrate what Ivo Armida actually mentioned in her opening. What she mentioned was that the region has, in fact, achieved significant progress on some of the SDGs, like on achieving resilient infrastructure, or promoting sustainable industrialization and fostering innovation, or on clean water and sanitation, and indeed on quality education as well, goal 4. So there are a number of SDGs where progress is fairly on track, if we could put it that way. At the same time, and of considerable concern, I would say, is that ASEAN is regressing on the achievement of a few SDGs, including, and importantly, as we've seen in the COVID context, Co-Chair, reduced inequalities, goal 10, climate action, goal 13, life below water, that's goal 14, and peace, justice, and strong institutions, which is goal 16. So a mixed picture of progress and regression so far. But what does that mean going into the future and looking into the future? Well, our assessment shows that where ASEAN countries could be headed by 2030, obviously based on current trajectories, and noting, as we have in this very meeting beforehand, that progress is not necessarily linear, that we can build up steam for acceleration. But what you see on the screen is the green areas that tell us that if we maintain the current trajectories, and it's a bit small, I appreciate that. If we maintain the current trajectories, we will be able to, for example, eradicate extreme poverty in the ASEAN region. Maternal and child mortality will no longer be a threat, and universal and affordable access to the internet, something that's been exposed as being so vital during COVID, will also become a reality. So there is a swathe of green across the goals, and that's really all that we need to see from that. But the predominance of yellow and red that you also see on your screens indicates that ASEAN countries can only succeed with the SDGs through acceleration, especially when it comes to healthy environment and resilience. So actions like addressing the threats of climate-induced disasters, actions to decarbonize economies, and transition to green and efficient energy, actions to strengthen social protection systems, which have proven to be so invaluable during the pandemic. All of these are areas for acceleration. And the last thing you'll see on the screen is a lot of gray, and the gray areas show targets that we cannot track yet because of the lack of data. So the prevalence of gray really shows that while data has improved, and we probably have about double what we had when we first started our high-level dialogues, that there's still quite a big data gap that remains in place and that we need to address. Now, ASEAN member states have consistently underlined the importance of the complementarity of the two overarching agendas, which in a way have been guiding their development, the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and then the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So you will recall that under the Complementarities Initiative, we have 5 priority areas of complementarity identified, and the simultaneous implementation of these interconnected areas was felt to be key to the overall achievement of both agendas, the ASEAN vision as well as the SDGs. So what happens when we look actually at progress through the window of these 5 complementary priorities? Well, the results in a way reiterate that the ASEAN region is not fully on track as we look even through the lens of the Complementarities Initiative. I think it's the next slide. There we go. This is especially so for promoting sustainable consumption and production and building resilience to climate-induced disasters, 2 of our windows of complementarity as we had seen beforehand. So implementing the Complementarities Initiative is as relevant, even more relevant today as it was when it was set up. It's good to see that, of course, the implementation of the Complementarity Initiative has mobilized more and more participation of the development partners, the UN, the governments, and of course, the member states. And we're going to hear about many of those initiatives that sit under each of these priority areas over the course of this meeting. Many of the flagship initiatives identified initially under the Complementarities Initiative and report have now become a reality. One is, of course, the Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue, which is now a reality and is playing an important part today, as well as in the implementation of the Complementarities Initiative and Roadmap. And in addition to the flagships that were identified, including the Center, the Complementarities Initiative has helped to direct, I think, our collective work on these 5 priority areas. And it holds as true for ESCAP as for any other institution around the table today. And here I'll just give you a couple of examples. When we look at the complementarity area of sustainable management of resources, for example, a clear ASEAN priority, the SDG progress assessment shown earlier highlights really the need to better manage natural resources, including in the recovery of the post-COVID time and in achieving the SDGs. So here, the recent establishment of the ASEAN Resources Panel can certainly play its part. It was facilitated by us at ESCAP, but it's going to help to assess scientific knowledge and translate this into practical policies that will protect natural resources and improve the daily lives of people in the region. Just another example of follow through and follow up on a flagship initiative of the Complementarities Initiative. Similarly, with the surge in plastic waste, including from PPEs and the masks that we're all wearing in this room and outside, the timing couldn't be better for our project on closing the loop, scaling up innovation to tackle marine plastic pollution in ASEAN cities, that aims to improve the capacities of local governments in ASEAN to take action on marine plastic pollution, in line with the ASEAN framework for action on marine debris. And I'm sure we're going to hear more of this from colleagues at the UN Environment Programme in terms of action on that part of the Complementarities Initiative. Touching on a second area, resilience, which obviously is very high on the agenda. When it comes to resilience, we are also moving forward on a number of fronts. One of those is on slow onset disasters. For example, Southeast Asia has long endured severe droughts. Over the past 5 years, the region has experienced probably the strongest droughts recorded in decades, and really no ASEAN member state has been spared. So in collaboration with the ASEAN Secretariat, and of course with the great leadership of our friend DSG Kung Phuoc, we released the second edition of the Ready for the Dry Years report, Building Resilience to Drought in Southeast Asia. And that really began to uncover how droughts are impacting on livelihoods, on food security, as well as increasing environmental hazards, including, of course, things like forest fires and eventually the haze that results. But the report also points to many areas for scaled up action. And again, as this is an example of the Complementarities Initiative driving us towards action. We are, from ESCAP's point of view, certainly continuing our partnership with the Secretariat, with the ASEAN Secretariat, in the development of the plan of action to operationalize the ASEAN Declaration on the strengthening of adaptation to drought, and of course in supporting countries with the implementation of this action plan. So we've gone from the assessment to the political conversation that was so vital, to the action plan, and now its implementation, all under the umbrella of the Complementarities Initiative. Co-Chair, it is of course not possible to provide a scene-setting presentation and not touch on COVID. And ASEAN's progress on the SDGs, of course, have been touched by and impacted by COVID as well. We know that millions of the most vulnerable in the ASEAN region, indeed in the Asia-Pacific region as a whole, are coping with the impacts of COVID on their livelihoods, including many small and medium-sized enterprises, informal workers, some of the most vulnerable in our societies. But far from sidetracking the Sustainable Development Goals, as His Excellency, the Foreign Minister said, the impacts merely highlight the need to double down on the SDGs. And this includes increasing the level of investment in areas like social protection among the ASEAN member countries. Again, I think it underlines the importance, the validity of the implementation of the Complementarities Initiative and the associated roadmap that we're going to hear about in a moment. We worked very closely with ASEAN in the development of the recovery framework that's already been mentioned. And of course, that is going to be another one of our guiding lights. We participated, as Ibu said, in the ASEAN Social Cultural Community meeting of partners organized by the Secretariat. And there we echoed the commitment made by the UN Secretary General that the UN is committed to working with the ASEAN member states in the implementation of that recovery framework. But here, I think the good news is that the implementation of the recovery framework does not run and doesn't need to run on a totally separate track. Indeed, this is where the tracks begin to converge. It builds on the foundations of the work that exist under the Complementarities Initiative, some of which I've touched upon, and it can build on the foundations of the ASEAN-UN Plan of Action that was endorsed by the leaders at the 11th ASEAN-UN Summit. With this new plan, actually, we have a much stronger focus on many of the issues of complementarity, including raising ambitions on climate actions, including addressing the issue of oceans, including a greater highlight on gender equality. So in conclusion, Co-Chair, we're really very much looking forward to hearing from all around the table, because we are not fully on track, whether we look at it through the lens of the SDGs, whether we look at it through the lens of the Complementarities Initiative, or indeed, I guess, through the ASEAN Vision 2025 lens. And that's why bringing this partnership together has, in our estimation, so much value. What I presented to you can of course be accessed through the website, and it is at your disposal as collectively we try to redesign our programs, to refocus them at a time of high need in response to COVID, the SDGs, and ASEAN's vision. Co-Chair, with that, I hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sahedi. So the report card is a mixed one. So we're not on track. I don't think that will surprise anyone, but we're not at the deadline yet. Okay, and I think we can. It's our duty, you know, for to keep working on the SDGs. I was so I'm maybe impressed is not the word, you know, when the SDGs were agreed. It was such a big achievement for humankind, for all of the UN's nations, you know, to agree on 17, you know, common goals. So we should continue to be empowered by them, and to and what is happening around us, and what may come in the days ahead or years ahead. That should make us want to work even more, you know, towards these goals, because I don't know if anyone in this room has real estate on Mars, but not me, so I can only live here. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Kung Fok, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN, for the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, to speak on ASEAN's undertakings to promote sustainable development. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. And first of all, you know, let me congratulate Thailand and the UN ESCAP for organizing this timely and also important meetings. And I would like to also take this opportunity to thank the UN ESCAP, you know, for taking time to attend our meetings, the ASCC Partnership Conference. I think it is very clear that we have a common goal here, that all the ASEAN member states, you know, will work toward achieving the SDG. Of course, as you pointed out in your presentation, we are still lagging behind on a number of issues. Actually, again, as Mr. Co-Chair just mentioned, it's not a big surprise, given the dramatic and also devastating impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the ability of the member state, you know, to allocate enough resources to further advance the implementation of the SDG. But then again, we have a choice here, you know, by looking at the situation that we are in and what would be our future. And this is some things that we are focusing on at the moment. And I'm happy to also share with the meetings that, you know, with this ideas in mind, that's why we are working on the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. Actually, we're looking at the guiding principles of the development of the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. We want, you know, our future to be more resilient, inclusive, sustainable, because this is not just the problems of health that we are facing at the moment. When we're looking at the overarching impact of COVID-19, there are so many sectors in our societies have been affected by COVID-19. And actually, the impacts do not, you know, fall evenly on all segments of the society. We see that, you know, some proportion of our population have been affected even, you know, worse comparing to others. So this is the issue of inequalities and so on. So again, I have to say is that now we have a choice to do some things to, you know, prepare our region for a future that we want. A future that is not just about, you know, looking at the GDP data, but also the well-being and livelihood of our people, and also the well-being of our environments as well. On the a couple of points that was presented by Mr. Kawe, my good friend, about the joint work that we are doing together. For example, on the regional plan of actions for adaptation to drought. Now the discussion is underway as we speak. We are also having the ASEAN Social Cultural Council meeting starting at the same time with the meeting that we're having now, and the minister, you know, look forward to discussing this, and it's already, you know, included as part of our outcome document for the 38 ASEAN summits as well. So we are serious, you know, about not just the economic impacts of COVID-19 or the livelihood impact of COVID-19, but also the environmental impact of not just, you know, for this particular crisis, but also, you know, the kind of, you know, shock that the region will face in the future. Of course, the shorter time that, you know, our people, our region is exposed to shock, the better and faster they can recover from the shock and emerge, you know, stronger and better. Now let me go through some of the updates that we'd like to share with the meeting today. Of course, the annual dialogue jointly organized by Thailand and the UN ESCAP in cooperation with the ASEAN Secretariat is among the living example of this commitment of ASEAN in achieving the SDG. On top of this initiative, ASEAN remarkable progress in enhancing complementarity between the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, evident in its various initiatives in the forms of regional dialogues and forums, knowledge product publication to establish gender data and evidences in relation to SDG. I would like to also bring to the attention of the meetings, the past 5 years we've been working on the SDG forum in partnership with the UNDP and China. The first one focuses on leaving no one behind, and then we look at the financial aspect on the implementation of the SDG. And of course, it's also important to make sure that when it comes to the ownership and of the implementation, and also the allocation of enough resources, to make sure that we can quickly advance the implementation of the SDG. We look at the localization of the SDG in ASEAN, and also in 2019 we also work on the inclusive innovation in achieving SDG and eradicating poverty. Of course, it's a bit unfortunate that we can't do it physically this year, but we continue our work. So the 5th ASEAN-China UNDP Symposium, and the topic will be on enhancing the role of youth in achieving the SDG, will be held on 8 April 2021. And we will discuss the critical roles of youth in the decade of action to deliver the SDG by 2030, while at the same time identify further strategies and way forward to provide enabling environment for youth to fulfill their potential as catalysts for sustainable development. We are also planning for the 6 symposiums as well, and it's going to be taking place sometimes in late 2021. And for this particular symposium, we look at the rural development, poverty eradication, and climate change from the angle of SDG as the key, agenda here. Apart from all this initiative, the ASEAN Forum on SDG with National Development Planning Agencies started in 2019. It's another platform that's been maximized by ASEAN to accelerate cooperation in implementing and monitoring the progress of SDG and ASEAN both at regional and national level. And the second ASEAN Forum on SDG with National Development Planning Agencies was held on 12 October 2020 through video conference, where the importance of collaboration to achieve the SDG and the need to develop an ASEAN work plan on SDG cooperation and institutionalization of cooperation platform among national development planning agencies were highlighted. In this forum, the progress of SDG implementation in the region were given primordial attention, including the areas where double efforts are needed, such as reducing inequality, goal 10, and promoting peace, justice, and strong institution, goal 16, where ASEAN is still lagging behind. The leading efforts made by ASEAN in the inaugural publication of 2 milestone documents. The first one is the ASEAN Gender Outlook, Achieving SDG for All and Leaving No Woman and Child Behind. And the second one, the ASEAN Development Outlook, at the time of celebrating Women's Month this year. The ASEAN Gender Outlook, jointly produced by the ASEAN Committee on Women and the ASEAN Secretariat and the UN Women, provides fresh data and that shows the need to continue investing in the most vulnerable women and girls in order to achieve the SDG. This is in recognition that gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls is at the heart of a 2030 agenda for sustainable development, being the building block and accelerator for progress across the SDG. The ASEAN Gender Outlook reveals the impact of COVID-19 to women and girls living in poor households and rural area who are often facing multiple deprivation, social and economic and environmental disadvantages due to lower income, less decision-making power, and limited access to essential services and infrastructure, resulting in deprivation for sustainable development outcomes. On the other hand, the ASEAN Development Outlook, our flagship publications as well, aims to chart the progress toward inclusive and sustainable development in the region, as it identified key challenges and example of best practices on lesson learned using a foresight approach for future policy planning and programming for achieving inclusive and sustainable development. So I would like to encourage, stakeholders and partners to make use of this report to inform ongoing and future action on the SDG in the region. More importantly, in making policy recommendation to advance progress against existing goals and propose new ones where applicable. While ASEAN already has strong external linkages with development partners and cooperation, there's a crucial need to focus on further deepening internal linkages and partnership to produce best outcome in the SDG, while investing on strategy to improve data system and statistic to regularly monitor the progress in SDG in the region. As this point clearly highlighted by Mr. Kave, the lack of data is not just hinder our efforts in looking at what are the areas that we should focus on, but also prevent us from using the resources wisely and strategically. Actually, we've been discussing about how can we further improve this, not just looking at the lack of data, but also to put in place a system so that we can help the member state to collect all the necessary data so that we can have a better pictures, on what situation we are in when it comes to the implementation of the SDG. And I will have to thank UN ESCAP as well for taking time to attend the meeting, Ronnie, I think. So we were looking forward, to working together on this, and hopefully we can have a robust and also comprehensive monitoring and evaluation framework, and also a data hub. With regard to health, I'm also happy to share with the meetings that we are going to launch the ASEAN portal for public health emergency, which is also a data hub for public health related matters during the health minister meeting next month. So when the portals is up and running, I strongly encourage everyone to make use of it. We are trying to consolidate it and make sure that such a webmaster will contain all the necessary information you want to find when it comes to our responses to COVID-19 and also many other infectious diseases that may emerge in the region in the future. To conclude, I would like to say this in this challenging time when the world is still facing and learning from the ongoing pandemic and its variant, more synergistic work are still to be done across all three pillars. It's very important. Not a single pillar can handle all of this problem. We have to work in synergy. We have to work in partnership, and also with various partners and member states to make sure that we can further advance the implementation of the SDG. Because our ultimate goal is to make sure that through this priorities and work we can uplift the well-being and livelihood of our people. And again, although we are now more than 1 year into the pandemic, there's still a lot of moving elements. There's a lot of things that we need to further understand and study. And in order for us, to better have a better idea on how we are going to respond more effectively, ASEAN Secretariat is also working with Cambridge universities and Nanyang Technological Universities to do a study which look at the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19. And we hope that, the finding and data and information from such a study will inform our policymakers on what would be, the policy that we need to put in place and the kind of resources we need to mobilize to make sure that all of the activity will be implemented. With this, I thank Mr. Co-Chairs and all colleagues at this meeting, and I'm more than happy to answer any question if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Q&A will come later in the session. So if people have questions, please jot them down. Certainly, thank you very much. There's certainly a lot going on in ASEAN, and data has been mentioned by all the speakers so far. And so in that context, I wish to congratulate the ASEAN Secretariat for the publication of the ASEAN Sustainable Development Goals Indicators Baseline Report 2020, as well as the successful convening of the second ASEAN Forum on SDGs with national development planning agencies in October 2020. The report underlines the importance of enhancing cooperation to obtain quality SDGs related statistics that are useful for monitoring the SDGs implementation in the region. And in addition, the ASEAN Forum on SDGs is a valuable platform that can help foster synergies with other relevant fora, such as the one we are sitting at today. I think the important thing is for ASEAN to bring everything together. There's a lot going on. Next, I would like to invite my former colleague and also state quarantine mate. We were in different hotels, but we were in state quarantine at the same time. I was very impressed when he made an occasion of everything. You know, he had video conference meal with another friend in another room. You know? So perhaps he can bring some of that energy and imagination into sustainable development in ASEAN as well. So Ambassador Narong Sasithorn, the Executive Director of the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue, I invite him to present a report on the overall implementation of the Complementarities Roadmap 2020 to 2025 and the work of the ACSDSD Center. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I think I remember the last time we talked when we were, at the quarantine facilities. But I like to add that my hotel didn't have a kind of beach view that you did, and I like to say that I'm very happy to see you again, Deputy Executive Secretary. I'd really enjoy and highly value our Zoom meeting a couple months ago, and really appreciate some guidance and words of support from ESCAP. And also I'd like to say good afternoon to Deputy Secretary General for ASEAN, His Excellency Mr. Kong Phuoc, who's also I enjoyed having a Zoom session with him and to get a better picture of how the ASEAN Center on Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue can work together with all the sectoral bodies of ASEAN. UN ESCAP, ASEAN Secretariat, and MOFA Thailand consider our three custodians. And I like to record our appreciation and gratitude for three of them for their wonderful support from day one. I'd like to thank the Deputy Executive Secretary Zahidi for his updates on the SDGs and the roadmap implementation. Myself and my deputy took a small part in participating in the reviewing and selecting some 160 indicators with your colleagues at the Statistics Division. It was quite an educating experience for both of us. And from the finding on the screen a moment ago, it seems that, of course, SCP, the Sustainable Consumption and Production, is an important area. And it seems is the area that's a bit left behind. And for this reason, I'm very glad that the SCP will be a big part of our work plan for this year of the center. And I'd like to thank the ASEAN Secretariat as well, especially the Poverty Eradication and Gender Division for the ongoing effort to collect information and to come up with a matrix to compile information regarding projects and activities that happening on the ASEAN sectoral bodies and entirety. And we hope the ASEAN Center can make some contribution to add more information when we host a networking symposium in May, where relevant ASEAN centers and entities will share their activities and projects. And in the meantime, we will certainly study the metrics and to see where and how the center can make a good contribution to complement the ongoing efforts. Mr. Co-Chairs, I have some updates on the work of the center to share. But before I do so, I'd like to say a few words on how we envisage the way we execute our jobs in this crowded field. First, we are fully mindful that we must work really closely with all relevant sectoral bodies and centers in the ASEAN structure. ACSDSD has its work plans that include giving study and research grants every year, as well as some projects with our partners. But we know that these work plans should be aligned with and complement those of relevant sectoral bodies of ASEAN. As an ASEAN entity, we know that ACSDSD must be well anchored in the ASEAN sustainable development structure and processes. We will take into our consideration key policies, priorities, studies of ASEAN bodies, especially the ASEAN Development Outlook and the ACRF, in which sustainability is one of the broad strategies. Now, an update of our work plan for 2021. There have been a number of key partners who want to work with us, want to support the sustainable development for ASEAN. We carefully study our priorities, taking into consideration the progress of SDGs implementation in the region, as well as key strategy in the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. And we come up with 5 main projects for this year, and they were endorsed by our Governing Council. The first project is a networking symposium that we co-organized with the Asia Foundation on May 11th. The purpose, of course, is to build our network with all SDG actors and players in the region. Partnership is vital for advancing sustainable development. We will have 5 small group discussions to take on 5 priority areas of the roadmap. And we hope we could be able to develop our own agenda of priority that we can put on the table when discussing projects with partners. As director, I'm very enthusiastic to work on this project, and I have to thank the Asia Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation for that support. Later in May, the center will join UN Women and other partners in organizing a rollout activities of the Outlook report. We were grateful for the opportunity to participate in the launch event of the report via video conference in Jakarta in February. The center is fully mindful of the 2017 ASEAN Declaration on the gender responsive implementation of the 2025 ASEAN Vision and SDGs. Next project is the Swiss ASEAN Peer Sharing Forum on the implementation of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, with a special focus on agro-industry. The Embassy of Switzerland is our partner. Business and human rights is one of the key elements in SCP, which is one of the roadmap priorities. Private sectors in the region, especially SMEs and micro SMEs, will participate in and will definitely benefit from this project. Next, in September, the center will co-organize another important project in collaboration with the Embassy of Norway on marine environment protection. It involves 2 seminars and a beach cleaning activity on September 18th, which is the World Cleanup Day. And we will orchestrate this activity and campaign throughout the ASEAN region. We hope it promotes policy dialogue, sharing best practices, and public awareness. Last but not least is an ASEAN circular economy stakeholder platform. European Union through eReady is our key partner. This is one of the biggest projects we ever taken on. Supporting the region's transition to circular economy is a key priority in the ACRF. And ASEAN, and this project is aimed at supporting and accelerating this transition. We envisage the platform will have three main activities. Information portal is a website, is to be hosted by the ACSDSD. Then we have the annual conference on circular economy and some collaborative projects throughout the year. Mr. Co-chairs, apart from these collaborative projects, studies and research is another important work that we do. Last year, we provided 3 PhD fellowships to applicants from Myanmar, Vietnam, and Thailand. We also funded a research on sustainable development and the COVID-19 pandemic in ASEAN. The study offers some best practices and policy recommendations for regional and national recovery efforts. Is now available to all ASEAN stakeholders. And this year, we will provide another 3 full PhD fellowships to all applicants from ASEAN member states and 1 research grant. Our special focus for the research grant this year will be responsible consumption, especially in the plastics in food delivery and behavioral study of operators and consumers in tourism business. In terms of our structure and organization, our Governing Council had its second meeting on January 28th. It adopted rules of procedure, endorsed our work plan, and the composition of our advisory board, which now will include members from our partners who have concrete development projects with the centers. The advisory board will have its first meeting in the 4th quarter of this year. And that sums up our update of our work. And we are confident that these projects will accelerate sustainable development cooperation and support our efforts to make a sustainable recovery from the crisis. And on top of this work plan, there are 3 more projects in the pipeline that the center is discussing with some interested partners. And these are the projects on monitoring and evaluation. We know that to advance, to do our job in advancing the roadmap implementation, we really need to build up our capacity on monitoring and evaluation. And this is one of the projects that we are discussing with one of the partners. Another project is on sustainable consumption and production with an emphasis on responsible consumption to address the issue of plastic waste. And this is also another key topic in the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. There is another project that we are really excited to discuss with our partners, ESCAP and ASEAN Secretariat. It's a study project to have a publication of the center that will take on evidence-based evaluation of the roadmap implementation, as well as to provide a set of recommendation, practical solution on how the center and our SDG partners in ASEAN Secretariat, in ESCAP, and also other development partners can streamline our efforts and resources in the overall implementation of SDG in the region. I like to reiterate our appreciation to ESCAP, ASEAN Secretariat, and MOFAD Thailand once again for their solid support and guidance. Our thanks also go to our Governing Council members and all development partners. And we are looking forward to participating and to hearing comments and dialogue in the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Narong Sasitorn. I must say that I'm very impressed with the report. Ambassador Sasitorn is a very humble man. When he came to see the management of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I mean, I couldn't have imagined that so much work has been done and so much is on the agenda. You know, I think your center will contribute to ASEAN very well, and I think all the ASEAN stakeholders will be grateful, you know, for the work that you have done, but also for the development partners, you know, that have kindly got together with the center to come up with concrete and practical projects. It starts with implementation, you know, and everything that is done with careful planning. Like in Thai, it's ตั้งใจ, if you know, with determination, will bear fruitful results. I just wanted to say that Thailand, for Thailand's own, from Thailand's own part, we, the Foreign Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Thailand mentioned the bio-circular and green economy model. So this is something that we are pushing. We've pushed in ASEAN, and he said that we've been tasked to come up with how we can implement, you know, bio-circular and green economy model in ASEAN. But we will also introduce, you know, for the members' consideration in BIMSTEC, which is in the Bay of Bengal, but also for APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation 2022, starting work on that this year. Bio-circular and green, I told the foreign minister that it's something that everyone understands, and I believe that we'll be able to do a lot of work, good work on bio-circular and green. And when it comes from a developing economy like ours, I think that's a good sign for everyone that we are looking at issues that normally, traditionally would be something that is raised by more developed countries, which means that the message is percolating, you know, down to other participants. So before we conclude our discussion in part A, you know, questions will be taken up later. I would like to reaffirm Thailand's support for ESCAP's projects and activities to implement the Complementarities Initiative. Thailand is lucky to have ESCAP here. Many initiatives have been born out of ESCAP's work. One of the ones that I cite example a lot is the BIMSTEC, you know, grouping in Bay of Bengal, which started from a political idea, but it was given meat, you know, by some research which was done in-house in ESCAP that just needed a political vehicle. So in the days ahead, you know, we look forward to collaborating more and turning some of your good ideas into even more realities. We will continue working with all partners and stakeholders to promote sustainable development in ASEAN and at the global level. We are proud to be known as a country that pushes economic agenda, but also we want to be known as the country that pushes the social agenda. That is our tradition. We hope we can do that better and better as the country develops. We're also planning to organize a number of pertinent activities later this year with various partners, including an ASEAN-China event on sustainable development and the third ASEAN-EU dialogue on sustainable development. Now I'd like to hand over the floor to my co-chair, Mr. Sahedi. Then I can sit back and listen to interesting stuff. Thank you.
Thank you so much, co-chair, and thank you to DSG Kung Phuoc, to Ambassador Narong for all that they provided in the last session. As you see, you know, the Complementarities Initiative is moving into the action phase, or has moved into the action phase, and that's what this agenda item is all about. Effective implementation of the Complementarities Roadmap, including in light of the COVID-19 challenges. With your permission, co-chair, and given the time is short, we have about an hour and 12 speakers or presenters already identified. So we're going to try to speed through this as fast as possible. And if the speakers could keep to less than 5 minutes, that would help us to more or less have enough, hopefully, time for some exchange and to conclude in a timely way. And there's no better place to start than with the chair of ASEAN. So to give us a little bit of an overview on advancing sustainable development under the ASEAN chairmanship, I'd like to hand the floor to Mr. Gary Ibrahim, Director General of the Department of ASEAN, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brunei Darussalam. Over to you, Mr. Ibrahim.
Thank you very much. Very good afternoon, co-chairs, excellencies, distinguished participants, and friends. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, very well.
Wonderful. So at the outset, please allow me to convey Brunei Darussalam's appreciation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Thailand, the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, for inviting us today to the high-level brainstorming dialogue. We are very pleased to have this opportunity to contribute to this very timely and important discussion. I would also like to commend, again, Thailand's very strong leadership as the ASEAN coordinator on sustainable development cooperation. I thank the previous speakers for an excellent overview of ASEAN's the progress that ASEAN has made to date in terms of the Complementarities Initiative, as well as its roadmap, and also what we started on for the ASEAN-UN Plan of Action that we started this year. In my short remarks, essentially, I'm going to inform a bit about what ASEAN is doing this year to advance sustainable development cooperation under Brunei Darussalam's chairmanship theme of We Care, We Prepare, We Prosper. Indeed, the world and ASEAN in 2021 will continue to face challenges and uncertainties, as well as opportunities. Countries in the region have continued to address the broad impacts of COVID-19, and they've embarked on what is essentially an ambitious global vaccination initiative. We've also stepped up efforts for comprehensive and sustainable recovery. Many of us have learned over the past year of a pandemic, we've learned a lot of lessons. And essentially, we've seen a renewed emphasis on multilateral cooperation, which is inclusive, mutually beneficial, as well as the need for a rules-based regional architecture, which is upheld by international law. In terms of sustainable development, as we heard earlier, ASEAN has seen mixed progress. And indeed, we've even seen some regression. Therefore, at this point in time, we believe it is a very important year for ASEAN and for the United Nations in terms of helping sustainable development in the region. Brunei's theme of We Care, We Prepare, We Prosper recognizes this, and our priorities follow suit. We focus on harnessing the caring nature of ASEAN to build a harmonious and resilient community with people at its center. We look at preparing and adapting for the future to ensure that ASEAN remains relevant and its people can take advantage of new opportunities, as well as overcome the future challenges that are coming. We're trying to create opportunities for people to benefit from initiatives that essentially enable sustainable prosperity for the whole region. So how do we want to achieve this? Well, essentially, we're looking at promoting a strategic and holistic coordinated approach to addressing emergencies, crises, disasters, disruptions, and anything that may face the ASEAN community. Essentially, we've recognized that we live in an increasingly interconnected world, and for us to be better prepared for future challenges and opportunity, we need to be more coordinated across the whole of the ASEAN community. And only then would we be able to achieve the socio-economic goals and pursue sustainable development. Excellencies, aside from the continuing, for Brunei for this year, aside from continuing our strong cooperation with the UN and working through the plan of action, working on the advancing in the roadmap on the Complementarities Initiative, allow me to share a few very specific deliverables that we're doing in our chairmanship year. And these are, as mentioned by the distinguished co-chair earlier, these are the actions. This is the implementation. So the first bit is, as we've heard a lot throughout this afternoon session, it's recovery, work towards a green recovery. And we're doing this through the implementation of the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. And this is in line with Goal 3 of the SDGs. And a key component of this is the work that we're doing with UNICEF to procure, deliver, and administer $10.5 million worth of vaccines to every ASEAN member state. Because recovery, this is a key component of recovery. We're also working closely with ESCAP in developing this COVID-19 recovery guidelines for resilient and sustainable international road freight transport connectivity. So in addition to the recovery framework, there's other things we're doing under Brunei's chairmanship. We're also working to develop a common understanding on the blue economy, which coincides with the work we're doing under the SDG 14. We're also trying to embrace the digital era in our recovery, and we heard this come out in the opening remarks earlier. And from our side, we're working on establishing a work plan to implement the ASEAN Agreement on e-commerce. We're also looking at an ASEAN joint declaration on energy transition and energy security to help ensure resources in the region and guide our work with external partners. And earlier we heard this from the ASEAN Center on Sustainable Development about work on circular economy. And this is another initiative that we're working on. We're trying to develop an ASEAN framework on the circular economy, which would articulate how ASEAN understands and prioritizes the circular economy, and essentially gives that link between the ASEAN social cultural pillar and the ASEAN economic pillar. Aside from that, we've also got initiatives on responding to opportunities and requirements for a mineral-intensive, low-carbon and digital future. And then finally, I think we're working towards the end of the year for the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference in the UK. And we're going to have an ASEAN joint statement on that, on climate change. And it's an important event coming up in the year. The last part of what we're doing is about the people. Under Brunei's chairmanship this year, we recognize that sustainable development, resilient development, the future, we have to invest in our people. And one of the impacts of COVID we've seen is the impact on people's mental health across the region. So with our partners, including with Australia, as well as within the East Asia Summit, we're looking at advancing work on cooperation on mental health, which would look at all aspects of it. So working on mental health with regards to youth, educators, and the civil service, and drawing on the expertise from outside the region to help us in our region build more resilient societies. And this final point is important because the sustainability of sustainable development rests on the belief and the will of the people in the region, particularly the youth. Over the past year, people have gained a lot of confidence in science, which has helped bring the planet together as we've overcome COVID-19 through vaccines and through research. And this strong belief in science, it can be harnessed so that we heed the cautions of experts on other challenges like environmental degradation, climate change, and marine pollution. And this perhaps is the paradigm shift that His Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Thailand mentioned in his opening remarks. This paradigm shift that we need to accept that these fates are coming and we need to be prepared for the challenges of climate change and other challenges. And with that in mind, I think it's vital to continue to place emphasis on education and the inclusivity of youth as a priority for sustainable development. And this is an area that His Majesty the Sultan and Yang Pertuan of Brunei Darussalam has continued to emphasize. And we've even put it in our own national plans, our own national development plans, prioritizing youth. And so going forward, I just want to end by saying that Brunei Darussalam stands ready to work with all our member states, with all ASEAN member states, the United Nations and other partners in the advancement of sustainable development and the Complementarities Initiative this year and onwards. Thank you very much, co-chairs.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ibrahim. It's a massive agenda that you've just outlined, and it cuts across the complementarities pillars as well as the SDGs. And of course, you have a our full support. And we're going to hear about many partnerships that I think are quite well aligned with the initiatives that you outlined. We're going to take a deep dive first into the poverty eradication priority, improving the standards of living and well-being of peoples through sustainable job creation and human capital development, one of the pillars of complementarity. And for that, first of all, we have His Excellency Mr. He Yousheng, who is the permanent representative of China at the UN ESCAP, followed by my colleague Jaco Silius. But first, Excellency, over to you. Mr. He.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to participate in today's dialogue. I would like to thank Thailand and ESCAP for co-hosting this event, and I wish this dialogue a fruitful outcome. Poverty eradication and people's livelihood has always been top priorities for the Chinese Communist Party and also the Chinese government. In the past 8 years, nearly 100 million impoverished people have all been lifted above the current poverty line, a complete victory in eradicating absolute poverty never achieved in China's history. We successfully met the poverty alleviation target set out in the 2030 Agenda 10 years ahead of schedule. In total, in the last 40 years, 770 million rural residents have shaken off poverty, accounting for more than 70% of the world total. This is a significant contribution to global development and the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And how did China achieve this? Indeed, I have 5 thoughts to share. First, integrated planning. Poverty alleviation has always topped the agenda of the Communist Party of China and the government. It's incorporated into the National Development Plan and the work program of governments at all levels with sound mechanism support. And the government coordinates enormous financial resources with a strong focus on poverty alleviation, having poured earmarked funds up to 1.6 trillion yuan over the past 8 years only. Second, a people-oriented approach. This is equals to the people-centered approach, I think, by ASEAN. The well-being of the people has been always at the center of our work. The commitment is leaving no one and no village behind. With great efforts, China has established the world's largest education system, social security system, and medical system. The average life expectancy of Chinese people has increased from 35 years old to 77 years. Third, the whole of society mobilization. The government, the private sector, and the communities are making concerted efforts in close partnership. In recent years, digital technology boosted e-commerce, which operates in a cross-sector and a cross-region manner. With it, agricultural products found broader markets, both domestically and even abroad. Fourth, targeted strategy. Policies are tailored to different villages, households, and individuals. Capacity building has made poverty alleviation a blood-making process into a blood transfusion model. We step up efforts to improve education in poor areas so that poverty caused by lack of education does not carry on to the next generation. Fifth, dedication and commitment. Nationwide, we have set up 255,000 task forces, sent 3 million government officials to poor rural areas, select 2 million officials on the county level and millions more on the village level to fight poverty altogether. And even among them, 1,800 officials who devoted their lives to poverty eradication cause. China's achievement in poverty alleviation has not come easily. Indeed, it's a result of the joint efforts and hard working of the Communist Party of China, the government, and its people. Going forward, China is entering into a new development phase. We are initiating a devastating drive of rural vitalization to better promote quality and sustainable development. Mr. Chair, as close neighbors and the indispensable partners for common prosperity, China and ASEAN has built strong ties of unity, friendship, and cooperation, among which poverty alleviation and sustainable development sit on the top. China has been the biggest trade partner of ASEAN for 12 years straight, and now ASEAN takes over from the European Union as the biggest trade partner of China. Between China and ASEAN, connectivity building, economic cooperation, and people-to-people exchange is strengthening. Our fruitful cooperation has significantly improved our people's livelihood and make huge contribution to poverty alleviation in both China and ASEAN countries. Facing the challenge of COVID-19, China and ASEAN help and support each other in defense. In this regard, China prioritizes the supply and donation of vaccines to ASEAN countries, including Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Philippines, and Indonesia. And we also carry out a number of cooperation programs for development, including the China-ASEAN Forum on Sustainable Development and Poverty Reduction for 14 consecutive years. The village-based poverty alleviation pioneer projects in Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos. IAI capacity building projects tailored to the needs of CLMV countries, as well as projects in areas of health, agriculture, environment, disaster management, connectivity, digital economy, and etc. Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, 2021 marks the 30th anniversary of the establishment of China-ASEAN dialogue relations. It is also the China-ASEAN Year of Sustainable Development Cooperation. Domestically, China will kick off the implementation of the 14th five-year plan, where ASEAN will continue to forge ahead in line with the ASEAN Community Vision 2025. Let's join in hand and build a close community with a shared future, ushering in the next 30 years with brighter prospect and better implement the 2020 Sustainable Agenda. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Excellency. And given the time limits there, allow me to move immediately to my colleague, Jaco Cilliers, the manager of the UN Development Programme's Bangkok Regional Hub, who's going to set the example for brevity.
Thank you very much, Kaveh, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen and delegates. It's really very nice to be here. I'll try to live up to what Kaveh has put out there. But let me just first say it's really great to also share the session with the delegate from China. As was mentioned by Mr. Kun Pok, next week ASEAN-China UNDP will have a symposium where we will be looking at enhancing the role of youth and achieving the SDGs, and we look forward to that important role as well as we move as we address some of the issues being discussed here. The nations of ASEAN have really made remarkable progress over the last 3 decades in human development, the improvement of basic services, and reducing poverty. And these important achievements and experiences of adapting and responding to the changing complex nature of sustainable development is really something that the region should be very proud of. However, let me just take 3 points, and I'll stick to 3 points, very similar actually to the theme that Brunei has outlined for this year around we care, we prepare, and we prosper. I think what we would add there is to say that we care for all, we prepare for all, and we all prosper, which is really what the issue around poverty eradication is all about. Because the first point is really that we have seen through COVID-19 the importance of addressing a modern social protection system that takes care of everyone in a country. UNDP as the UN technical lead on socioeconomic impact and recovery has seen across 145 socioeconomic impact assessment that we've done across the world that those countries that have fared better in recovering from COVID-19 have had robust social protection systems in place. And in Asia Pacific, there are very good examples, but in general, the region spent less on social protection than the global average, and less than Latin America, where we have many middle and similar income countries. So therefore, we really see the importance of well-targeted systems that prevent vulnerable groups from slipping further behind, and therefore also strengthening cohesion and resilience. The second point is really that addressing poverty is multidimensional, and we have known for a long time that monetary-based poverty measure can miss a lot. And we know that economic growth does not always reduce poverty or deprivation. And we know that many poor people describe the experience of in poverty as multidimensional. And therefore, we want to congratulate the ASEAN Roadmap that really has an inclusive, multidimensional approach to look at poverty and includes many areas such as education, health, and many other areas that needs to be considered within poverty eradication. And lastly, and the third point is really, how do we prosper all together? The third and the final point, therefore, for me is around the pledge of not only the ASEAN Community Vision 2020, but also the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, around how do we make sure no one is left behind. The economic and social effects of the pandemic have really different ways across countries and have impacted people differently. And we've seen that women and excluded communities are often those that are mostly impacted. And therefore, we look forward to also see how targets around leaving no one behind within ASEAN address some of these challenges. For that would be the important area that needs to be focused on, both in urban and in rural communities, if we want to achieve the goals of eradicating poverty. Thank you very much, Kaveh. Back to you. Oh.
Jaco, that was magnificent. Thank you so much. No, I think you brought most of the points. I mean, the social protection, the multidimensional poverty, and the leaving no one behind, but with specific targets. And I think this links back to the action agenda and to what the roadmap is about as well. Maybe we do need to learn a little bit more in terms of setting the targets to be able to follow our own progress. And we do note the symposium next week, right, Jaco? Next week, yes. Okay, very good. The next sort of mini segment is when we jump into infrastructure and connectivity, another one of the complementarity pillars. And here we were to start our discussion. We have Mr. Hiroshi Kawamura, who is the Minister and Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy of Japan. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. In 2019, under the chairmanship of Thailand, Japan and ASEAN leaders issued a joint statement on connectivity. Our leaders confirmed that enhancing connectivity is a key to realizing regional integration and cooperation, as well as a promotion of sustainable development in ASEAN. In this regard, I highly appreciate the active role of Thai government, including hosting today's dialogue together with ESCAP. In Japan, Prime Minister Suga recently stated digitalization and green society will be the engine for growth in the coming decades. Prime Minister also announced that Japan aims to achieve carbon neutral society by 2050. Today, I would like to highlight Japan's approach to improving connectivity under the concept of quality infrastructure in the ASEAN region. I will also explain how this concept works for digital and green connectivity. The ASEAN region is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Japan strongly believes, however, that growth should not be simply economic growth, but quality growth. First, growth should be sustainable over generations in harmony with the environment. Second, growth should be inclusive with leaving no one behind. Third, growth should be resilient. As the countries frequently suffered from natural disasters, Japan and ASEAN must be able to share the importance of this concept of resilient growth. Next slide, please. So how can we achieve quality growth? The answer is quality infrastructure. In Asia, there is a significant infrastructure investment gap. But for quality growth, it is not enough to merely fill the gap, since poor quality infrastructure would not generate value for money and only lead to unreliable access to essential services in the end. Therefore, it is important to promote quality infrastructure investment in accordance with international standards. And I believe that quality infrastructure complements digital and green connectivity. But how? Next slide, please. Let me give you two examples of quality infrastructure. First, Neak Krum Bridge in Cambodia. In addition to its great benefits in easing traffic congestion and improving the connectivity of the Mekong region, Japan also paid extra care to mitigate the social and economic impacts of its building. The project minimized the relocation of local people and chose the best route, assisted the implementation of public consultation with local communities, and enabled the transfer of state-of-the-art building method to Cambodian workers. Bohol Airport in the Philippines, which was constructed by Japan's assistance, is another example of green connectivity. A significant amount of power used in the airport is generated by solar power generation, upholding the concept of an ecological airport. The use of LED and efficient air conditioning system significantly reduced the use of power. Next slide, please. Next, I would like to underscore how quality infrastructure works for digital connectivity. In terms of strengthening connectivity in ASEAN, Japan has placed great importance on port development. Sihanoukville Port in Cambodia, Katimbang Port in Indonesia, just to name a few. In the case of Myanmar, Japan engaged in Yen-Long projects to establish the terminal in Tirawa Port to enhance handling capacity of Yangon Port. In this project, Japan introduced a cutting-edge digital customer administration system, and this significantly reduced the time required for customer administration and further improved port capacity. I will skip the next slide and the last slide, please. Let me finish my presentation by showing Japan's determination to support strengthening connectivity in the ASEAN region. During last year's Japan-ASEAN Summit meeting, Prime Minister Suga launched the Japan-ASEAN Connectivity Initiative, one of the landmark initiatives of the Japan-ASEAN cooperation and the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. The initiative aims to support strengthening ASEAN connectivity, both in hard and software, with focus on the ongoing 2 trillion yen worth of land, sea, and air corridor connectivity infrastructure projects, together with capacity building projects for 1,000 individuals over the next 3 years. Japan continues to incorporate quality infrastructure, especially in promoting digital and green connectivity. I thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Excellency, thank you very, very much indeed for bringing the concept of the quality growth into the conversation. That's exactly the kind of action-oriented approach that can bring the Complementarities Initiative in this pillar to life. Let me turn immediately to Ms. Birgit Hansel, who's the country manager for Thailand for the World Bank. And the World Bank has provided us some of the most amazing presentations during these past 4 or 5 years on the Complementarities Initiative and its pillars. So Birgit, without any pressure, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, co-chairs, Excellency, colleagues and friends. Let me focus in my 5 minutes today in the interest of brainstorming, not just on 3 points that are summarized in a couple of slides. One is on regional supply chains, on digital connectivity, and one on implementation of critical connectivity infrastructure. And that's really focusing mostly on the lessons learned over the last year. Next, please. So let me reflect in terms of what we see in global supply chains happening on 3 points. The first is that COVID has highlighted vulnerabilities and risks in global supply chains, but we also saw that there is an increasing opportunity for regional supply chains. And actually, if we at this point step back and see what happened globally, we see value chains remained pretty stable, which is of course, good news. So there is also an element of resilience that we see that especially can be supported through building more regional supply chains in the ASEAN community, which will play an important role also in future shocks. And third, it became clear that regional trade agreements are most helpful when they go beyond tariff negotiations, when they really touch upon cross-border trade facilitation that makes trade more efficient in any situation. Next, please. Without any doubt, it became clear during COVID that digital connectivity is ever more important. And we see also that it is perhaps more complex than we thought. And COVID highlighted here the case clearly for online platforms as key elements of regional trade. And the same is really true for digital forms, procedures, and data sharing on customs departments. But what we also see is that there's still a lot of room for growth in ASEAN. If we look at the digital economy to GDP in ASEAN, it was about 7% here compared to China, we had 16%, 27 in the EU, and 35 in the United States. And the challenges of digital adoption are really beyond the platform creation, but includes the need for a skilled workforce, knowledge of entrepreneurship, data openness, and the framework that is needed for that. Next, please. Let me close with a couple of points on the role of the importance of connectivity infrastructure in the recovery and also in terms of implementation as such. What we can already say at this point is that new investments, especially in physical infrastructure, will be a critical part of the successful recovery story after COVID globally. And we have already evidence that infrastructure investment, physical infrastructure investments will have larger multiplier effects in terms of fiscal stimulus than increased recurrent spending, which we see, of course, in the first relief phase in many countries being the main fiscal stimulus. So it will become crucial for most governments in the long term to invest more in physical infrastructure. But here, the quality and preparation of projects is to attract financing remains a critical challenge. And I would like to just refer to the advisory services the World Bank is providing to ASEAN on the master plan for ASEAN connectivity towards the pipeline of regional infrastructure connectivity. And second, I also wanted to point out that there are key benefits for regional infrastructure projects in itself, but the idea is really about boosting economic activities. So we see really a much higher importance on creating economic corridors rather than just simple projects. And the need to connect multi-sectoral and multimodal transportation and connectivity. And one example here is a regional connectivity initiative we have jointly with Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar to connect to the Yunnan province. Let me stop here and hand it back to the co-chair.
Very good. Thank you very much. Very clear. And of course, it resonates with us at ESCAP because we have connectivity sort of in our DNA from the very get-go. But the three areas, the trade facilitation, the digital connectivity, and the infrastructure, all of which maybe came under even greater scrutiny during or as a result of COVID. And many of them are cross-cutting. Multimodal connectivity is not just about connectivity; it can also be partly about climate change. So it is a cross-cutting agenda that you've laid before us. So thank you very much for that, Birgit. Next, we're going to turn to another pillar of connectivity, which is the sustainable management of natural resources, including combating marine debris. And we're going to start off with a message, I understand, from Mr. Jens Frølich Holt, who is the State Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway.
Ministers and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to speak to you on behalf of Norway about issues relating to plastic pollution, environmental issues, and protection of our oceans. These are topics that are very close to Norway's heart and is also a key part of our international policy. They're also very high on my agenda as State Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also the Norwegian representative and Prime Minister Erna Solberg's representative in the high-level panel on the sustainable ocean economy. Norway greatly values our partnership and cooperation with ASEAN countries. The ASEAN countries are among the countries in the world that are most negatively affected by plastic pollution, but you have openly acknowledged the challenges this entails, and that makes it all easier to work together to find solutions. And finding solutions is what Norway is striving to achieve. As current president of the UN Environmental Assembly, the Norwegian Minister of Climate and Environment, Sveinung Rotevatn, stated at the Assembly's February session that it is imperative to get back on track to fulfill the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I'm pleased to note that the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 supports this goal, and Mr. Rotevatn also suggested that we should further discuss global actions to prevent plastic pollution, with a focus on a new global agreement. I will return to this, but a few basic points about plastic pollution. Preventing plastic pollution is one of Norway's key international priorities. We have set up a development assistance program to combat marine pollution and also targeting waste management on land. It's also a big part of our engagement in our embassies, ranging from local projects to clean up beaches to more bigger policy-oriented efforts like the Global Agreement on Plastics. Ocean plastic pollution poses a threat to marine life, as well as all those who depend on the ocean for their livelihood. The threat extends also to life underwater, to fisheries, to other economic sectors, and also to the beautiful coastlines and beaches of the ASEAN countries, places that are important tourist destinations, also for Norwegians. When we return to normal business as normal and there's more tourism again, Norwegians will be flocking to your country's beautiful beaches. We have seen, of course, the economic impacts of COVID-19, but there is also an environmental impact, and especially related to plastics. We now see that personal protective equipment is being discarded and ending up in nature. So the environmental impact is something that we need to focus on as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Norway greatly values our sectoral dialogue and partnership that we have with ASEAN. I'm very pleased that we just concluded our new 5-year cooperation agreement. Ocean affairs, maritime environmental protection, and marine plastic litter are important elements in this agreement. Norway also welcomes the recently initiated project with the ASEAN Center on Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue in Thailand. These are important issues that we will continue to work together on. In September, Norway and the Center will co-host a plastic pollution cleanup event in all 7 ASEAN countries where Norway have embassies. I invite you all to join this effort. Cooperation between Norway and ASEAN on plastic pollution has yielded results. We have high expectations for a regional ASEAN project, and the cooperation we are supporting between the International Maritime Organization, the ASEAN Secretariat, the ASEAN Maritime Organization, and ASEAN Maritime Transport Working Group on Marine Environmental Protection. We also have a number of successful bilateral projects underway in various ASEAN countries. Ladies and gentlemen, let me briefly revisit the topic on a global agreement to prevent plastic pollution. Over 2/3 of UN member states have publicly stated there is a need to explore the feasibility of such an agreement. This is a good number, and it shows that there is interest globally to step up our fight against plastic pollution. The business community too recognizes that there is a need to do something. We have companies like Coca-Cola, Unilever, and Danone sign on to the business call supporting a UN treaty on plastic pollution. Germany, Ghana, and Ecuador have announced that they will host a ministerial conference on this issue. Norway supports these countries in their task here, and we encourage ASEAN countries to take part as well. If we do not get a broad regional outreach, then the signal and our work will be much harder. It will be difficult to get where we want. And of course, next year, at the February 2022 session of UNEA, member states will have to decide on whether to move a global agreement forward. Needless to say, Norway thinks that we need to move forward, and I urge you all to join this initiative. You can find more information about the global instrument of this type if you look at the report that was released last year by the Nordic Council of Environmental and Climate Minister. This Nordic report seeks to employ best practices from existing multilateral instruments and tailor them to address plastic pollution specifically. Advancing the development of a global agreement on marine litter is a key step in improving global environmental governance. And the participation of the ASEAN countries would definitely add further momentum to this initiative. The ocean spans the whole world. We all need to work together in order to get a cleaner ocean and a more healthy ocean. And without ocean health, there is no ocean wealth. So I really look forward to working together on this issue for the coming years, and Norway is very eager to partner up with ASEAN. Thank you.
With our thanks to the State Secretary, let me turn immediately to my colleague Jyrka Tamalanda, who's a coordinator of the Secretariat of the Coordinating Body on the Seas of East Asia, COBSE, at the UN Environment Programme.
Co-chairs, thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we're facing a triple planetary crisis of climate, nature, and pollution. Can you go to the next slide, please? I think plastic perfectly exemplifies the pollution crisis. Of all plastic that's ever been made, well over half has simply been discarded. Almost a third is currently in use, effectively waiting to be discarded because the proportion that's recycled is very small, and the proportion that's recycled more than once is even smaller. With the COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a surge in plastic waste, medical waste, protective equipment, food containers, packaging, etc. And this has caused much additional leakage into the environment. There's been a 50% drop in demand for recycled plastics, a drop in sales prices for recyclate, and a very large drop in plastic waste collection and sorting in the informal sector, which, as we all know, has a central role in waste management in this region. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, with the pandemic in its second year, what countries provide good examples in terms of preparedness, of roadmaps, innovation, or other measures? And how can we promote exchange and learning based on that? And most importantly, perhaps, what is best practice in building back better? And I emphasize that because the pandemic has really exposed and exacerbated underlying challenges rather than create new ones when it comes to plastic. In many cases, waste management and recycling were not coping prior to the pandemic due to shortcomings or incoherence in policies, institutional mandates and capacity, financing, and incentive structures. Recall Kave's presentation here just a moment ago with the SDGs most relevant to plastic pollution, 11, 12, 14, all showing a reverse trend or need for acceleration. And there are very, very large data and information gaps in relation to all of them. Now, the pandemic response must comprehensively address these challenges, considering increased consumption and haphazard disposal, but also considering plastic as a material, production and design. That said, next slide, please. That said, we're not starting from scratch, of course. Here I'd like to emphasize the resolutions adopted in the UN Environment Assembly that lay out priorities and direction and have generated a range of actions. And of course, you will have heard the State Secretary also mentioning this a moment ago. I emphasize the outcomes of the UNEA-mandated ad hoc open-ended expert group on marine litter and microplastics, which identified a range of response options. And it unequivocally stated that status quo is not an option. It noted that current action is too narrowly focused, and it emphasized the importance of upstream actions. Remaining sectoral barriers and coordination challenges need to be overcome to achieve coherent, bring together visions for economic growth and trade, inclusion, and environmental protection. In doing this, it's very critical that we build on the mechanisms that we have, the efforts that are already in place and that are underway. Next slide, please. I'll highlight in this forum the complementarity between the Regional Action Plan on Marine Litter adopted by countries participating in the Coordinating Body on the Seas of East Asia, COBSE, and the ASEAN Framework of Action on Marine Debris. Building on our support towards the ASEAN Conference in 2017, the Special Ministerial Meeting in 2019, we look forward to continued and deepened collaboration. This may encompass alignment and coordination of support for national policy planning and institutional development. COBSE's ongoing regional efforts to support research networking, development of harmonized national marine litter monitoring programs, as well as guidelines and knowledge products are important building blocks. Current capacity building efforts include the Marine Litter Massive Open Online course running in 9 languages, including Chinese, Vietnamese, Thai, and Indonesian, with additional languages of this region being introduced next year. Later this year, we'll also launch a regionally focused outreach and behavioral change campaign to beat plastic pollution. We'll continue convening the annual Sea of Solutions multi-stakeholder and partnership event, and we will support knowledge management through the establishment of a regional node of the Global Partnership on Marine Litter. Through these and other efforts, including on nutrient pollution reduction, marine and coastal spatial planning, marine protected areas, and policy dialogue on a sustainable blue economy, we continue to contribute to and enhance the ASEAN-UN Partnership for Sustainable Development. So with that, co-chairs, thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute here, and I look forward to the rest of the dialogue.
Thank you very much, Jukka, and thank you. I think you very clearly set out the sort of almost the stepping stones that are either already in place or can easily be put in place that could take us towards that vision that the State Secretary from Norway set out for us. Of course, very much related to the issue of sustainable management of natural resources is sustainable consumption and production. That was also mentioned by His Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister in his opening. And to hear about action in that area, we have the honor to have Mr. Jean-Louis Ville, who's the Director for Middle East, Asia and Pacific, Directorate General for International Partnerships of the European Commission. Mr. Ville, over to you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, honorable delegates, dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like first to thank the co-chair, Thailand and ESCAP, for an invitation to participate to this dialogue today. I'm extremely honored. Over the past 44 years, as part of integration, we have built a true international partnership and gained a deeper understanding of our respective policies and priorities. Today, as we stand as strategic partner, the EU and ASEAN work closely together to deliver on our joint commitments towards inclusive sustainable development, the achievement of the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goal, as well as the Paris Agreement for climate change. Our development cooperation is very substantive and concrete, but I will not get into that because I'm absolutely conscious that time is limited. Let me only mention that we overall have an effort of 2 billion over the last period for the bilateral support to ASEAN countries and around close to 300 million for dedicated regional cooperation. I'm delighted to be here today to present our cooperation on green transition and especially our circular economy and sustainable production and consumption. Let me first perhaps say a few words regarding the Green Deal agenda. Over the last years, the EU has been supporting the shift to low carbon and more circular economy with our best efforts to leave the next generation a world that is habitable and as the one we have inherited. Our long-term goal cooperation is to shift resilient, regenerative and climate neutral economy. An economy that holds and ultimately reverses climate change and environmental degradation and minimize pollution. This approach does not only affect the way our business works, but also the way citizens and regular consumers act with, in all, a more responsible approach. It is about here making fundamental changes in the way business is done and the way the world consumes. It starts with defining overall ambitious emission targets under the Paris Agreement, as well as for biodiversity and circular economy. For its part, the EU has committed itself to reaching a net zero emission by 2050 and decreasing emission by 55% by 2030. And we expect all our partners to set themselves similar targets corresponding to the best efforts. 1 year ago, the European Commission adopted the Circular Economy Action Plan. It's one of the main blocks of the European Green Deal. The plan focuses on the entire life cycle of projects, and it targets their design, promotes circular economy processes and sustainable consumption. This has become even more relevant in our efforts to build back better and greener after the COVID-19 pandemic. Coupled with the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, the EU and ASEAN are seeking a lasting, sustainable and resilient transformation of our economies and society. The EU is committed to work hand in hand with our ASEAN partners to transfer these global ambitions into actions, both through bilateral or regional cooperation. Now, specifically on the ASEAN, our partnership with ASEAN already stands strong on the area of environment and climate change. We have launched an ASEAN-EU high-level dialogue on the environment and climate change and keep a close contact to share experiences on circular economy, on biodiversity, on natural capital and climate change. We hope to also begin cooperation in strengthening sustainable clean energy. Switch Asia is one of the tools the EU offers to strengthen this collaboration. In the spirit of SDG 12, regarding sustainable consumption and production, the Switch Asia program aims to accelerate the green transition of countries in Asia to a low-carbon, resource-efficient and more circular economy. This is done by engaging with the industrial sectors, consumers, financial institutions and national governments. Over the last 2 years, Switch Asia program has been supporting many of our ASEAN countries in preparing their national action plans on SCP. These plans are helping governments to consider new production and consumption models which are greener and more sustainable, thus providing a first step for their recovery. So far, the program has supported around 130 projects 49 of which are in ASEAN countries, benefiting overall more than 400 European and Asian partners and to almost 70,000 companies in the fields of energy efficiency, waste to energy, circular economy, plastic prevention, eco-labeling, or certification and corporate social responsibility. However, more has to be done as the uptake of more sustainable consumption and production models cannot be tackled in isolation, but a response at regional level is very important. I would like to highlight our partnership with the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue on SCP, as announced during the EU-ASEAN Dialogue on Sustainable Development in February 2020. We are looking forward to the launch of the ASEAN Platform on Circular Economy in 2021, as supported by our enhanced regional EU-ASEAN Dialogue instruments, ERADI, on circular economy. Together with the Center, the European Commission and ASEAN Secretariat are working closely to make this initiative a model of success for the region. We are also exploring further collaboration on other specific areas, including promoting more sustainable agri-food supply chains and food standards. As a final word, I would point out that all these cooperation efforts are jointly supporting the external dimension of the EU Green Deal and the ASEAN Community Vision 2025. And this is our ambitions to continue to steering our joint partnerships in the directions in a more sustainable, greener and inclusive future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for joining the dots between the action under this pillar and the work of the centre that has come out of the Complementarities Initiative and what is needed really to promote sustainable consumption and production, the elements of it, including through the Switch Asia programme, which of course is an important one for our region. The next pillar is the resilience pillar, and I don't think we need to tell anybody in ASEAN about the importance of resilience, being such a region that is exposed so often to all sorts of natural and climate and man-made disasters. So enhancing resilience really is at the centre of building the complementarities and addressing the SDGs and building back better pretty much every agenda that is on the table. To kickstart that conversation, we have first as a message from Ms. Tosca Baruco, Minister and Italy's Special Envoy for COP26.
As Italian Special Envoy of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, I am extremely grateful for the organizers for this invitation, as a joint brainstorming with Italy is what we need to come up together with solutions and strategies to tackle the incredible challenges the world is facing. As a founding member of the European Union, Italy strongly believes in regional integration and welcomes the contribution of ASEAN for a shared and sustainable peace and prosperity and stability in Southeast Asia. Italy's position on the ASEAN development partner witness our full commitment in working together with our trusted ASEAN partner and friends, bilaterally and in multilateral fora, to uphold our shared principle and promote effective multilateralism. In this regard, we acknowledge the centrality of the Association of the Indo-Pacific region and its crucial role in addressing the growing global challenges we're all living, starting from the need to foster regional resilience to counter climate change. As we know, Southeast Asia is sadly one of the world's most vulnerable regions in the world. Climate-related hazards as floods, cyclones, and droughts make the area dangerously exposed to climate change impacts. Such events represent unjust and unacceptable impediments to the social and economic prosperity of the region. In order to implement the development partnership, we annually set up a number of initiatives, in close cooperation with several ASEAN members and agencies and international organizations. We are ready to broaden our cooperation with committed partners and agencies in the area, including with the UN ESCAP. Italy already started a number of comprehensive high-level training initiatives to to strengthen ASEAN membership and the AHA Center capacity in terms of early warning, disaster prevention, quick response, and management of natural resources in the framework of the Asian Vision 2025 on disaster management. In this regard, we are committed to support the operationalization of the ASEAN Declaration on One ASEAN, One Response, and keep working with our trusted partners to foster a culture of resilience and care for the environment. We also look forward to start working with the ASEAN Center for Sustainability Development Studies and Dialogue in line with Italian action to support the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Asian countries. By means of a more efficient and integrated management of natural resources, it's possible to pave the way for a more sustainable growth in major cities, making them safer and more livable place, and unlocking the strong synergy between climate change mitigation, resilience, and development. As we all know, 2021 is going to be the key year to fight against climate change. And Italy, as both G20 president and partner of the UK for COP26, intends to work strenuously to ensure the success of the negotiation process, reaffirming and strengthening our role as a virtuous, ambitious, and supportive country. Italy's G20 agenda focuses on three broad interconnected pillars of action: people, planet, and prosperity. We believe that recovery from the pandemics offers us a unique opportunity for a transformative change as a global community. While restoring the health of our economies, we need to invest on the health of our planet and to put people and nature at the heart of our political leadership. In fewer words, build back better and greener. At COP26, we intend to give a full and effective implementation to the Paris Agreement, and this will be possible only thanks to all parties making highly ambitious national climate commitments. This can ensure a successful transition to climate neutrality. As part of our COP26, Italy will host a significant preparatory events, the pre-COP, with the aim to offer ministers representing the main negotiation parties an opportunity to discuss the key aspect of the political process that can drive to a successful COP26. And we'll also host the Youth for Climate Driving Ambition event, linked in the pre-COP to give young people from all around the world, yes, including all our Asian friends, the opportunity to draw concrete proposals and discuss them with the ministers. Within the context of COP26 negotiations, special attention will be paid to adaptation and to the scaling up of climate finance as a means to sustain developing countries in the challenge of economic transformation, enhancing climate adaptation and resilience. It is imperative to redirect sustainable investment financial outflows so that they progressively align in support of the objective of the Paris Agreement. Contrasting climate change, mainstreaming resilience, and reducing the risk of natural disasters represent strategic priorities for our development partnership with ASEAN. Let's now join forces to achieve these common goals. Thanks a lot for your attention and again for inviting me to this extremely interesting meeting. Let's hope we can really now make progress together.
With our thanks to Minister Baruco. Before turning to the next speaker, we have three more speakers. So I would just wanted to ask for your patience. We have three more presenting, and I would like to ask for the presenters to please help us because time is a challenge. So if we could try to, if you would just bear with us, maybe, and we will extend this session by about 20 minutes. Try to take the 3 people who are presenting, plus another 3 people who would like to offer some reflections, including, of course, a couple of ASEAN member states. And it's really very important, I think, to hear back from them. So with that said, allow me to turn to Mr. Marco Toscano Rivalta, who's the chief of the UNDRR. Over to you, Marco.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zahedi. And in the spirit of disaster risk reduction, I have slightly reduced my presentation. So I would simply like to thank for the great opportunity to be here with you in this important dialogue. And I will just touch upon some key points. The next slide, please. I think that previous speakers have clearly made extremely important point, including the last Mr. Oscar Baruco. I think that what I want to take out of this is that fundamentally disaster risk and disaster losses are increasing. There is a big hit on SDGs achievement and most fundamentally on people's and their lives. And now, this, of course, brings, as you were also saying, Mr. Chair, brings resilience and building back better really to the fore as almost like a necessity. And the question is, how do we tackle that? Next slide, please. Now, we have been learning the hard way through basically disasters that disaster risk creation is systemic, is generated across sectors and also across borders. And we are learning the fact that we cannot manage risk hazard by hazards, nor sector by sectors. Now, the good news is that we have a blueprint to manage risk in the way it needs to be managed, meaning in a systemic manner, so that we can really pull together our knowledge, our forces, our instruments, and revert that vicious circle that take us from one disaster to the other, basically. Now, that instrument is the Sendai framework, and one of its core priorities is indeed building back better. So it is extremely relevant as we speak. And the fundamental point here is that we need to do a better job in managing disasters. Yes, that's absolutely central, but most fundamentally, that means that we need to do even better to manage disaster risk and enhance the edge of prevention and building back better. Next slide. This one basically takes us to the core of the ADMER work program, and which is great, is a fundamental piece, I would say. It has resilience and disaster risk reduction at its center, and the United Nations very closely with the ASEAN community is working hard to develop a joint strategic plan of action on disaster management. And within that area of collaborations, there are certain areas which are definitely of priorities, and of course this joint strategic plan is a fundamental instrument to implement the work program, especially on the areas on prevention and mitigation and resilience, of course. Now, what are these? One is, as we already just mentioned, the climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction strategies. They can and need to come together. The work at the local level with the city is very important. We have heard on the importance of school safety, infrastructures, hospital safety. So all of that really goes to the core of enhancing our resilience. The importance of course, social protection mechanisms. The United Nations, through the regional collaborative platforms and within it the issues-based coalition on building resilience, is really tooling itself up to be a strong partners for the ASEAN communities. There's a lot of important work that is being generated there and can be brought to the fore and bear on the implementation of the work plan and the work program, sorry. And so I think that there is more that can come from this joint collaboration with the ASEAN community. One important aspect that I'm getting to toward the conclusion is that the COVID-19 recovery basically is really an essential opportunity for us to integrate climate and risk management. And I maybe just next slide, please. I think that COP26 is really of essence in getting us together. We know that 80% of disasters are caused by natural hazard, and COP26 really offering us an important opportunity to join forces. So literally is an appeal, all the partners that are here with us today. We can bring disaster risk data to bear on development and humanitarian processes. We can do much more to integrate and enhance action on adaptation through the use of disaster risk reduction knowledge and data. And there is much more that needs to be done to enhance adaptation financing and therefore also disaster risk reduction financing, in addition to disaster management financing, which of course remains of essence. So the ambitions, the opportunity that we have is really to raise ambition here on mitigation and adaptation and scale up action, not only to reduce the existing risk, but also to prevent the creation of new risk. And I really want to emphasize that aspect of preventing the creation of new risk so that we can break the vicious circle. Next slide. International cooperation is fundamental. I think that after COP26, we have three important processes related to resilience. One is at the end of 2021, the Asia-Pacific Partnerships for Disaster Risk Reduction Forum, which will adopt the new Asia-Pacific Regional Action Plan for DRR. Then we will have the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction currently hosted by Indonesia, and then in the second half of 2022, also the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction currently hosted by Australia. I'll stop here, and again, thank you very much for offering us the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Marco, and we will collect, all of these presentations together and make sure that they reach all the audience with Ronnie's help, given that people have taken so much time to put them together, and it's much appreciated. Still on the issue of resilience, I have the pleasure of now turning to Mr. Johannes Mathiassi, who is the Deputy State Secretary, Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Over to you, sir.
Co-chairs, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Kingdom of Thailand, ESCAP and ASEAN for inviting Switzerland to attend this 5th high-level brainstorming dialogue. For me, it's a special honor to represent my country, as I have witnessed the very first days of Switzerland-ASEAN sectorial dialogue partnership in 2016. As the former Assistant State Secretary for Asia Pacific, it's for me a great pleasure to see how much my country has strengthened its relations with the region. I would like to congratulate the chairs on maintaining this meeting in a hybrid way, despite the COVID-19 situation. Achieving the SDGs and the ASEAN Vision 2025 cannot wait. And I just welcome the increasing number of countries and organizations participating in this dialogue. In the previous editions of this dialogue, Switzerland has shared various examples of our collaboration with the region under the SDG 12, namely sustainable consumption and production. An important Swiss-ASEAN project under this topic is the forum that we are co-organizing with the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue on Business and Human Rights and SDG 12, and that will take place in a hybrid format during the 2021 Bangkok Business and Human Rights Week. This is a very good example of joining synergies between Switzerland, ASEAN, and the UN while involving public and private sectors and civil societies. Switzerland and ASEAN are collaborating on many different domains since the beginning of our partnership. Today, I want to talk about resilience, one of the priorities of the Complementarities Roadmap. To strengthen resilience to a crisis or a shock, the three dimensions of sustainable development, environmental responsibility, social solidarity, and economic performance are to be kept in a balance. This requires policymakers to identify opportunities to maximize co-benefits and to manage the necessary trade-offs between different policies and interests. A transversal approach to meet a crisis like the current pandemic is complex and requires agile public policies. With the 2030 agenda, we have a shared blueprint for more inclusive and sustainable recovery after a crisis or a shock. Allow me to give you a few examples of how Switzerland is collaborating with ASEAN and the UN in this domain. In Southeast Asia, disasters linked to natural hazards killed more than 370,000 people in the past 20 years, while economic losses have been estimated at 86.5 billion USD per year. The new ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response Work Programme 2021-25 answers to this need for enhanced resilience building. As a rising economic powerhouse and home to more than 655 million people, the region's ability to recover from disasters quicker and with less future repercussions must be strengthened. Switzerland has been partnering with key local actors to that end. In collaboration with the ASEAN Secretariat, the Swiss humanitarian aid supports the implementation of AADMER to conduct first the ASEAN Strategic Policy Dialogue on Disaster Management as a platform to enhance future of disaster management in our region, and second, the Senior Executive Program on Disaster Management for ASEAN Member States decision makers. The AHA Center is another important partner for Switzerland. We have been collaborating on the ASEAN Regional Disasters Emergency Response Simulation Exercises, ARDEX, since 2016, and more recently, we supported the stocking of non-food relief items at the DILSA warehouse in China province in Thailand. On climate change, one of the major challenges of our times, I'm really proud that my country signed an agreement of cooperation with UN ESCAP in Bangkok in August 2020 to contribute to its trust fund for tsunami, disaster and climate preparedness. Finally, let me assure you that Switzerland is committed and stands ready to enhance the implementation of the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 together with the UN Agenda 2030 in ASEAN. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for your commitment and for bringing to life many of the initiatives that help us to implement the Complementarities Initiative. Underlying all the 5 priority areas of the Complementarities Initiative is undoubtedly the empowerment of women and gender equality in the ASEAN region. And with my apologies and with my thanks for your patience, Mr. Mohammed Nasiri, the Regional Director of UN Women for Asia and the Pacific. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and I will be brief, pressed with time. If we can move directly to the second slide, please. Over the past year, we've been very, very encouraged to see that the gender equality and women's empowerment has been explicitly prioritized in all of the ASEAN high-level meetings and across many new regional frameworks and plans adopted in 2020. Notably, the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, as well as the new ASEAN-UN Plan for Action 2021-2025, put the spotlight on gender mainstreaming as cross-cutting priority. UN Women is very proud to be a trusted partner of ASEAN through this journey, and building on our existing collaboration with ASEAN today, I will highlight briefly 4 concrete areas of support in 2021 and beyond. Next slide, please. First, on the production and use of gender data and statistics. UN Women has closely collaborated with ASEAN over the past couple of years to advance this work, and we've launched a report last month. As a follow-up to the launch, we are very pleased that Thailand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue have kindly agreed to co-host the event to roll out and disseminate the gender outlook later this year. While there has been significant progress to produce gender data across economic and social dimensions of the Agenda 2030, more efforts are required to engender disaster and environmental statistics. As we've seen from the co-chair's presentation in the beginning, SDG 5 is one of the ones that has the least indicators, and we need to work on that. This is the area that we hope to collaborate further with ASEAN to inform the implementation of Complementarities Roadmap, particularly around sustainable consumption and production, resilience, and natural resource management. We are also looking forward to institutionalizing support to ASEAN on monitoring and reporting progress towards the SDGs from the gender lens. Next slide, please. Second, promoting gender-responsive resilience. UN Women is committed to support the implementation of the new ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response 2021-2025. We are excited that gender and social inclusion is now a clear focus of the agreement. With the generous support from ECHO, UN Women has supported the establishment of the ACDM Technical Working Group on Protection, Gender and Inclusion. The working group has brought together different ASEAN sectoral bodies that are leading on disaster, gender equality and social welfare and development across 10 member states. In 2021, we will be focusing on supporting the development of the ASEAN Regional Framework on Protection, Gender and Inclusion in Disaster Management. On the capacity building, together with ACDM, we will organize innovative virtual road trips series on protection, gender and inclusion in disaster management by convening diverse actors and partners in the region to co-create knowledge on inclusive and gender-responsive resilience. We will also support the development of a positioning paper to support ASEAN to mainstream gender in the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. Finally, we will support the development of a resource library on PGI in disaster management to capture lessons learned and good practices within the outside of the region. The next slide, please. We do know that women are disproportionately vulnerable to climate change, but we also know that they are change agents for climate change adaptation, mitigation, and environmental sustainability. With the generous support from SIDA, this year we have proposed to support ASEAN in producing a regional assessment on the state of gender equality and climate change in ASEAN. We will also explore collaboration with the ASEAN Sustainable Development Center and Dialogue on various areas highlighted on the slide, including promotion of regional learning and exchange of good practices on gender and climate change, as well as joint campaign advocacy. The following slide, please. Last but not least, advancing women's economic empowerment will be key for COVID recovery. With the support of the EU, UN Women, in partnership with the ILO, has conducted the regional policy analysis to identify enabling public policies to enhance private sector engagement for women's economic empowerment, especially in COVID-19 response and recovery in the ASEAN. We would like to collaborate with Thailand and ACSDSD to produce policy action brief to highlight good practices in Thailand and other ASEAN member states to promote accountability of the private sector, focusing on inclusive business and women entrepreneurship in ASEAN. I must emphasize that UN Women has also been closely engaged with the ASEAN Women Entrepreneurs Network to advocate and promote good practices among private sector companies through the regional Web Women Empowerment Principles Awards. Thank you, Co-Chair, and back to you.
Mohammed, thank you very much. Very clear, very precise presentation indeed. Thank you for that. We have 10 minutes left, and we have three interventions, starting with the Lao PDR, His Excellency Mr. Latsmani Chiomani. So, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Co-Chair's Excellencies, at the outset, I would like to thank Thailand and UN ESCAP for having this very timely dialogue convened. Co-Chairs, my today's intervention will focus on 2 points: an update on achievements and future direction of Laos SDGs implementation, and our proposed ways forward to enhance complementarities between ASEAN Vision 2025 and UN 2030 agendas. On the first point, up to date. Our SDGs implementation is very on track, and the government has firmly upheld its political will and commitment to achieving SDGs by continuing to mainstream the UN 2030 agendas and ASEAN Vision 2025, as well as Complementarities Roadmap 2020-2025, and adopting the principles of sustainable development into our development plans and strategies. This year is very important as the government has been embarking on carrying out a voluntary national review, or VNR, for the second time, and plans to present it at the United Nations High-Level Political Forum in July 2021. The government has also been taking the initial steps on drafting VNR and organizing consultations with relevant stakeholders, including government and private sectors, CSOs, and development partners. This second VNR is very important as it will focusing on a depth trend analysis of the implementation of 9 selected goals and targets of SDGs, namely SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 2, zero hunger, SDG 3, good health and well-being, SDG 4, quality education, SDG 5, gender equality, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, SDG 13, climate action, SDG 17, partnerships for the goal, and SDG 18, our national sustainable development goal, life safe from UXO, remove the UXO obstacle to national development. In addition, this review will also align with our national development priorities, especially the outcomes of the 8th 5-year National Socio-Economic Development Plan 2016-2020 and the recently adopted the 9th 5-year plan, National Socio-Economic Development Plan 2021-2025, as well as to take into account the impact of the COVID-19 outbreak. Furthermore, this year, the Lao PDR and UN are working on developing our new Lao PDR UN 5-year Plan of Action 2022-2026 with the focus on achieving SDGs agenda and sustainable development. On my second point, Mr. Co-Chair, I would like to make following points. First, is the COVID-19 outbreak is unprecedented and it will be with us for unforeseeable time. Therefore, ASEAN and UN have to work together on mitigation and response measures, including to ensure equitable and affordable access to vaccines, especially through vaccines multilateralism or COVAX. In this regard, I would like to thank United Nations and development partners for the contribution to COVAX, where the first lot of 132,000 doses of vaccines provided to Laos through this COVAX scheme has already been arrived in Laos. Second, Laos encourages ASEAN and UN to do more on digital transformation to harness the advantages of ICT and to adopt 4.0 IR, especially to help our MSMEs to be able to do online businesses and e-commerce as well as smart agriculture. In this regard, I would like to encourage United Nations to contribute to our ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, or ACRF, implementation, as mentioned earlier by our ASEAN Secretary General, by focusing on strategic 4, inclusive digital transformation, and strategic 5, sustainable and resilient future, especially to assist ASEAN in human resources development in ICT, including digital literacy and skills. Thirdly, as both ASEAN and UN are neither donor nor funding organizations, therefore we have to jointly work to mobilize more resources, both technically and financially, to fund our joint sustainable development endeavors. Fourthly, Mr. Co-Chair, on my personal note, although up to date the Lao PDR has achieved a lot in our SDGs implementation, a lot remains to be done. We would like to encourage more UN's assistance in our SDGs awareness raising and advocacy efforts, especially to help us in developing and applying more online platforms and applications, such as mobile application, online meetings, including webinars, video conferences, and so on. And finally, the Lao PDR commends the work carried out by the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue, and request the center to continue playing an active role in providing technical assistance, capacity building, institution strengthening, and researches through trainings, workshops, seminars, and the provision of fellowships and exchange programs, especially to young and women entrepreneurs and farmers. I thank you, Co-Chair, and we look forward to furthering consultation and dialogues on sustainable development endeavors. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, and we took careful note of the requests also for where we could raise the bar in terms of collaboration. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we've surpassed all of the deadlines we had set ourselves, but I have the permission of the co-chair to make this an open-ended session. So we're quite willing to continue, and we're not interrupting because, you know, in some ways, and maybe Ambassador, this is a lesson for us in terms of the center and the networking meeting. This meeting becomes an opportunity to talk about so much more than the Complementarities Initiative. Clearly, there is a desire or a thirst even to do so, and it's important to hear that. Whether this is the right venue or not, it's important to hear it. So as we design our year forward, I think we need to make sure that we take that into account, whether it's the networking meeting, the symposium that China and UNDP have talked about, but this opportunity is needed. We have next on the list His Excellency Mr. Foster Gultom from Indonesia. Excellency, over to you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by extending my gratitude and appreciation to the government of Thailand and ESCAP for organizing this meeting. I'm confident that our discussion will be fruitful as always, and the spirit of collaboration among us will be stronger for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I highly appreciate the inspiring statements made by His Excellency Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Thailand, Her Excellency Under Secretary General of the United Nations, and the Executive Secretary of ESCAP, His Excellency Secretary General of ASEAN, as well as the excellent presentations made by the panelists and speakers who have touched upon pertinent issues under the Complementarities Roadmap. For Indonesia, poverty alleviation has always been at the forefront of the government's policy and program, both at national and regional levels. Up to 2019, Indonesia shows a declining trend of poverty in a decade and successfully managed to reduce the number of national poverty rate to 9.2%. This is the first time that we have reached below 2 digits. and extreme poverty rate to 2.7%. The population of Indonesia based on the 2020 census is about 270 million. However, the COVID-19 pandemic altered this achievement. In 2020, the percentage of people living below the national poverty line has increased to 10.2% and extreme poverty rate to 4.2%. Moreover, it is affecting access to quality food, which leads to the prevalence of undernourishment and stunting number, which is above 20% of WHO standard, mostly in rural areas. In response to that, the government of Indonesia launched economic stimulus policy and social protection program. This program is aimed to help the poor population and varied from conditional cash transfer with the amount of $2.3 billion for 9 million beneficiaries, cash transfer for workers amounting to total $2.2 billion for 15.7 million workers, electrical subsidy of $4.3 billion for 31.2 million households, and stable coupon start card for 1.9 million beneficiaries. Under the health sector, the government also subsidized hospital bill of $4.6 billion and allowance for paramedics of $414 million. As the new pool after COVID-19 emerged, then the efforts to reduce poverty must be thoroughly pushed. The main strategy is to accelerate poverty reduction by integrating affirmative policies for poverty reduction programs, improvement of beneficiary data collection scheme, and the development of graduation system for the social assistance programs. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in 2020 alone, Indonesia recorded about 3,000 natural disasters, from flooding, landslide, volcano eruption, earthquakes, to tornadoes. These natural disasters add challenges on mitigating the spread of COVID-19, as implementation of health protocols in refugee shelters and access to the health care and sanitation is severely limited. Furthermore, infrastructure damage cuts connectivity from affected area to the rest of the country. Infrastructure and connectivity indicators are key to ensuring equal access to sustainable development for everyone, and it is especially relevant for Indonesia due to its archipelagic nature. During the beginning of the pandemic, many infrastructure projects were halted because of social restriction and budget reallocations. In 2021, Indonesia prioritizes infrastructure of basic services, connectivity, urban infrastructure, energy and electricity, digital transformation, and infrastructure that is resilient to disaster. The pandemic also shown that digital connectivity is now more relevant than ever before. Many activities had to be digitalized during the pandemic, such as work and school. Although almost 100%, is about 97% in 2019 of the population has coverage to mobile broadband, the quality remains a challenge. Due to the various topography of Indonesian terrains, coverage needs to be continuously improved. To push for digital transformation in line with the ASEAN Smart City Network as a platform to build inclusive, smart and sustainable cities in ASEAN, Indonesia has taken similar approach in rural perspective. Through the national program of Smart Village, Indonesia aims to ensure that rural dwellers have access to network infrastructure via connected devices. Citizens can access impactful and transformational SDGs-related digital services. Services are customized for the specific SDGs needs of citizens. Integrated SDGs-related services are continuously improving and adapting to changes. And lastly, partner organizations involved are continuously learning and adapting their services. In this regard, we need to foster collaboration among relevant stakeholders to establish ASEAN Smart Village that is comprehensive, cost-efficient, collaborative, and sustainable. We believe that Smart Village could help us to accelerate the real impact of SDGs for people in rural areas through an integrated development and technology platform model. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 15-year global efforts to improve the life of people everywhere everywhere through the achievement of the 17 SDGs by 2030 was still on the track, even though we listened just now that the result is not so encouraging. Yeah. But we are still be in our commitment, yeah, to have our program and policies, in order to cope with that encouraging issues. It is imperative for Indonesia to immediately respond to the pandemic by, among others, refocusing its development programs on health system reforms, social system reform, disaster resilience reform, and economic recovery. Furthermore, the government also enacted a long-run adjustment by emphasizing and reorienting policies related to sustainable issues. Having said that, I humbly encourage more cooperation between the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue with various development study centers in the region, including with 2020 SDG centers that already established in Indonesia by March 2021. I'm also keen to invite our development partners to join and share their expertise in these endeavors. We hope by sharing experiences, finding solutions, and providing science-based and evidence-based recommendations to deal with and recover from the COVID-19, we could eventually exit from the dark hallways and see the light in the form of successfully completing our SDGs commitment in a decade to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Excellency, and very eloquent finish to it as well. I suspect that it was of particular interest for you to hear, given your focus on infrastructure, what Japan said about the Quality Infrastructure Initiative, and as well as what the World Bank presented to us, including the technical assistance framework that they have in place. Our next speaker is the distinguished delegate of Singapore. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Thailand and ESCAP for organizing this timely dialogue. Singapore supports the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Just last month, we launched the Singapore Green Plan 2030, which sets out Singapore's green targets for the next 10 years. It also strengthens Singapore's commitments under the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. Today, I'd like to just share 3 quick suggestions to further the effective implementation of the Complementarities Roadmap in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. First, ASEAN can do more to boost SDG implementation. ASEAN's implementation of the roadmap should be closely aligned with the 2030 Agenda to find synergies and avoid duplication of resources. We can therefore leverage on the ASEAN-UN Plan of Action to promote further cooperation between the two bodies. Singapore stands ready to work with ASEAN member states, the UN, and other external partners to support ASEAN's sustainable development efforts, including through the ACSDSD. Second, the pandemic has emphasized the need for us to accelerate sustainable urban development and building resilient smart cities, and this can be done through the ASEAN Smart Cities Network, or ASCN. The ASEAN builds on the global commitment to achieving the SDGs, in particular SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities. And the long-term success of the ASEAN depends on external partners' continued involvement, especially as we work towards recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm pleased to note that the UN and its specialized agencies have been supportive of the ASEAN. I encourage the UN to explore further partnerships under the network. For example, Singapore and the UN Habitat renewed an MOU just last year to provide capacity building and technical assistance to emerging cities in support of sustainable urban development. My third and final suggestion is the sharing of best practices and continued skills upscaling. This is critical for the ASEAN and the UN to mitigate the long-term effects of climate change and to promote sustainable development. Singapore stands committed to continuing our capacity building efforts for fellow ASEAN member states. We've trained more than 134,000 officials through the Singapore Cooperation Program in areas such as sustainable cities, water, and climate action, and these courses are closely aligned with the SDGs. Cognizant of the challenges brought by COVID-19, Singapore has also recently implemented courses to address the cross-cutting impact of the pandemic on the SDGs. I hope that ASEAN, the UN, and our external partners present today will take these suggestions into consideration as we work towards the effective and timely implementation of the Complementarities Roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Singapore. And indeed, we have taken note, and all of these contributions will shape the direction of the Complementarities Roadmap, especially its implementation. Although I do note that an extraordinary amount of pressure and expectation being placed on the shoulders of our new Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue. The next on the list, and potentially a final one, is the distinguished delegate of France, Mr. de Bojani. Thank you also to you so much for your patience. Thank you for taking the time to come here and to accompany us through the whole proceedings so far. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, France would like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Thailand and ESCAP for their invitation to this fifth high-level brainstorming dialogue. In the framework of our Indo-Pacific strategy, France attaches great importance to the two main multilateral organizations involved in this dialogue, namely the UN Regional Commission for Asia and the Pacific and ASEAN. As you know, France was granted the status of ASEAN Development Partner last September, and we are very grateful to ASEAN member countries for having taken this step towards increased cooperation. The health and socio-economic crisis we are going through bring many challenges, but they also create an opportunity to build more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive societies and economies. We share this commitment with ASEAN and its member countries as reflected in our respective strategic programs for recovery, which are the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework on the one hand, and the France Relance and Next Generation EU plans on the other hand. Our development partnership will be fully consistent with these frameworks. We would like to take the opportunity of this high-level dialogue to highlight the importance of the topic of biodiversity, which will be at the top of the international agenda this year. The World Conservation Congress of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, is scheduled to take place from the 3rd to the 11th of September 2021 in Marseille, France, and of course the COP15 on biodiversity next October in Kunming. In the framework of our development partnership with ASEAN, France, among others, is contributing to the ASEAN Catalytic Green Facility, ACGF, a multi-donor initiative in favor of green infrastructure and sustainable connectivity. And to be very concrete, it will be interesting to see how the discussions on biodiversity that take place in the COP15 context could be linked to and integrated into this green facilities work. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate of France. Very, very concrete and specific as well. That brings us, I believe, Ronnie, to the end of those who had sought to intervene during this conversation. Having done a particularly bad job this year, Co-Chair, in keeping to time, almost 1 hour behind time. In fact, I think that my summary will be a very simple one, and just to say that clearly there's an enormous amount happening. There's an enormous number of initiatives, projects, etc. happening. In spite of what is going on, in spite of all of this, it's clear that we haven't yet reached the paradigm shift that His Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister spoke to at the beginning. And we saw, in a way, that manifested in the presentation we made on progress on the SDGs, progress on the Complementarities Initiative. So there is scope for much, much more. But clearly, what we also see emerging are mega initiatives to create that paradigm shift, whether it's the biocircular, a green economy that we heard about, the quality growth and infrastructure, whether it's the holistic poverty reduction kind of approach, the green transition and circular economy. These are very similar. These really are about that paradigm shift. But how do we capture this transformation? I think that's really the challenge. How do we put all of these pieces together? How do we join all of those dots? And especially, how do we do that in the context of the Complementarities Initiative and the roadmap? I guess that's the challenge that is now squarely with the government of Thailand, with ESCAP, and of course with ACSDSD to really use the Complementarities Initiative as a place where it all comes together. How best we can do that is something that I think merits a lot of discussion. But Co-Chair, with that, I think that's my best attempt at pulling the strands together, and really I do thank everybody for their patience and for their contributions. They are valuable and they do feed everything we do, not just in the Complementarities Initiative, but in the programs of the UN partners, and the ASEAN partners, and we appreciate you all having taken the time. And with that, Chair, if I could hand back to you.
Yes, thank you. And it only remains for me to say, that, if I may, on behalf of the ASEAN community, thank you to all the development partners, the international organizations, and UN ESCAP, for your contribution. It's easier when we do it together, and we appreciate your inputs, And this is one area of work where we can say that it is truly about the people. And of course, we in government have to, and also especially in ASEAN governments, have to do what Mr. Sahedi says, is that now that we have so much positive response, we have to organize it together. But I'd rather have I'd rather have a lot of response than no response. And so thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, co-chairs. So that concludes the 5th high-level brainstorming dialogue. Please be informed that we will upload all the documents, presentations online, and circulate the link to your emails at the earliest opportunity. Also, the co-chair's summary of the dialogue will also be available in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and ESCAP's websites once finalized. Let me take this opportunity to thank all our colleagues at the UNCC for the effective servicing of this meeting. We would also like to recognize all the colleagues from the organizations co-hosting this event who worked behind the scenes to make this a very productive dialogue. For participants in the conference room, I would like to ask that you leave the room with proper physical distancing. Thank you for participating in this dialogue. We look forward to meeting you at next time. Thank you and good afternoon.